Now I get asked questions every day about cooking. The most common one is about steak. How do I cook the perfect steak? What cut of steak should I buy? And how do I avoid the dreaded grey band? One of the most important things when it comes to cooking steak is buying the right piece of meat. So no better place than right here, Victor Churchill's. Let's go talk to the butcher.
Dry aging's an art. It's not just a matter of grabbing a piece of meat and just throwing it in your fridge, you know what I mean? It doesn't work like that. It's a cardinal sin not to rest meat. But with dry aging meat, you don't have to rest it for as long. You still need to rest it, maybe 20 or 30% less than what you'd rest a piece of wet aged meat.
We're really lucky to be here today with Anthony Paharaj. Mate, thank you for having us.
Andy, nice to meet you and welcome to Victor Churchill.
Thanks for having us. It's an amazing shop. You're a 5th generation butcher.
My father, 4th generation butcher, he's dedicated 55 years of his life to sort of the craft of butchery. Victor Churchill is just this amazing store with an amazing amount of history. The oldest continuously run butcher shop in Australia, one of the oldest continuously run butcher shops in the world. And our family see us as sort of custodians of that legacy.
What do you think the key is to looking for when you're trying to buy a good steak?
I think whether you walk into Victor Churchill or you walk into our Vic stores or any real good local neighbourhood owner-operator butcher shop, seek out butchers who own and operate their store because they've got a vested interest in making sure they look after you and give you the right advice and all that sort of stuff. Meat colour's one of those things. So when, beef, for instance, you look for this beautiful deep red cherry colour. Marbling is an automatic indicator of eating quality and experience. When you've got marbling or that intermuscular fat through the meat, generally that meat been really well raised, really well looked after, and is going to be tender and juicy. Yeah. And look, beyond that, let's not overthink it and overanalyze it. Just speak to your butcher. Yeah. Just have a chat with him. Yeah. Ask him a few questions. Where's the meat from? Is it grass-fed? Is it grain-fed? Where do you buy your meat from? How's it raised? If he's good at what he does or whatever, he'll be able to pass on his knowledge and steer you in the right direction.
There's this perception in food, obviously for a lot of reasons, that fresh is best. It's actually probably not the case when it comes to beef specifically.
Aging meat is really, really important, absolutely critical in terms of the ultimate experience that somebody will have when they're sitting down to a piece of meat. There's wet aging and dry aging, and both obviously have their benefits. Dry aging is the pinnacle. It's an age-old process that not only helps to improve the eating quality of that piece of meat, so its tenderness, but also the flavour profile. So unlike sort of wet aging, where you'll see those sort of juices that have sort of been purged out of that piece of meat, that's actually all the natural goodness that exists in meat. With dry aging, and why dry aging is so special, is that all of those natural juices get locked into that meat and get absorbed by the natural fibres in that meat. People talk about, the different sort of flavour profiles or nuances that they're sort of tasting in a piece of dry aged meat, blue cheese or mushroom or whatever. If you're experiencing that in a piece of meat and dry aged meat, then it hasn't been dry aged properly. Yeah. Properly dry aged meat has a depth of beefiness and flavour to it, a concentration of flavour to it that's very unlike what you'll experience with wet aged meat, but it's not meant to taste like anything like cheese or mushroom or whatever.
Yeah. So there's lots of numbers that are thrown around the world, 30 days, 60 days. Talk us through those aging periods and where do you think kind of is the prime and how far can you push it?
The ideal sort of period to dry age any piece of beef is around that sort of 28 to 35 days. The benefit that you derive from aging longer than 35 days, there's this sort of inverse relationship, your wastage increases for a really small benefit in terms of sort of flavour and tenderness. But there are examples, and I'm responsible for it. Well, Lennox Hasty and I are responsible for it at Fidor, where we've absolutely pushed the limit. So we're dry aging for sort of 250 days. Which is unheard of, Not something that I'd recommend you do at home, Andy. Yeah. There's 4 things that you need to do in order to create the right environment to be able to successfully, properly, and in a very safe and hygienic way, age meat, okay? Temperature control is the first thing, sort of 1 to 1.5 degree, that sort of temperature range.
Oh, really? That cold?
Yeah,
right.
So that temperature range creates the right humidity. Humidity control in dry aging is ultra important, okay? Temperature control and humidity control go hand in hand. Airflow is another thing. Mold, settles and then sort of just grows. Okay, so you want to create an environment where the airflow is quite turbulent, so that that mold doesn't sort of settle on the meat and start sort of developing and growing. And then the last thing is UV, so ultraviolet light and ozone. So we use both, and what that does is that just sort of nullifies and kills any airborne bacteria in order to create this pristine environment for you to be able to dry age meat properly.
We talked about this earlier. This shop is beautiful, and you're clearly the produce that you have here, you said, is actually higher than a lot of restaurants serve. And I kind of challenged you and said, but what about for the everyday person? It's obviously at the top echelon of butcher shops. As an everyday bloke, should you come to Victor Churchill?
When we're standing in front of that cabinet, Andy, that is a reflection, representation and celebration of the best producers, the best farmers, the best quality meat that's available. Are the prices expensive? Yeah, they are. And I'm unapologetic of that. Producers, farmers, the animal husbandry, the way that all of that protein has been raised takes time, effort, expertise. I see walk through those doors every single day, hardcore passionate foodies who, if they had 20 bucks left in their wallet, they'd be spending on a beautiful piece of meat or some charcuterie or whatever it might be. It's also a special occasion place, it's somewhere where you visit when you're, you've got a birthday or you've got some mates coming over.
So we all know, the classic steak cuts, the ribeyes, the sirloins, the fillets. I reckon that there's some really underutilized cuts from the animal. What do you think of the cuts you should be looking for, where you still get great eating, great flavour, but cheaper than the kind of the main primal?
Yeah, I mean, those cuts that you mentioned, those cuts only represent 13% of the over. Yeah, that's it. There's so much more of the carcass that we've encouraged people to sort of explore. Yes, it's awesome sitting down and enjoying a beautiful ribeye on the bone or whatever it might be, but there's so much more of the carcass that you can enjoy from a texture, from a flavour point of view that won't break the bank. Oyster blade that you can use for both adobe, a braise, but you can sort of trim and prepare and turn it into flat iron steaks that you can actually grill. Things like inside skirt, bavette, flank steak, thin skirt, short rib, a really lovely cut. There's some of those sort of cuts that I really, really enjoy. And the price point of all those cuts are significantly less than those premium cuts that you talked about.
If you could have one steak for the rest of your life, what would it be?
I've got to go with the cut that I have fallen madly in love with in the last sort of 6 months, and it's inside skirt. Man, it's a delicious piece of meat. Lots of flavour, amazing texture, and it's also super tender.
Amazing, thank you, mate. Well, I guess we better go shoot some steaks to cook at home.
Thanks, Andy.
Appreciate it.
You're the same one.
Look at that, Ben.
Jimmy Barnes.
Jimmy Barnes?
Yeah.
What a privilege.
Andy wants a piece of this.
One rib?
Yes, please. Yeah.
And then the chine bone.
On this?
That is Rangers.
Rangers.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Cut them off.
So we've selected our steaks, and it's worth mentioning at this point that I'm very aware at how privileged I am to have access to meat of this quality. It doesn't get lost on me. Everything I'm about to talk about from here on in applies to whatever steak you can afford at your budget. The first thing I want to talk about is tempering steaks. There's a lot of stuff on the internet about whether you should bring your steaks up to room temperature or not. Some people argue you should, some people argue you shouldn't. In my opinion, there's no right or wrong here. Every restaurant I've worked in, we haven't really tempered our steaks. The order comes on, the steak gets pulled out and seasoned, and within 5 to 10 minutes it's on the grill. Now in 5 to 10 minutes, the core temperature of that steak is not gonna come up a significant amount, enough to actually change the effect. If you have got an hour or so to spare, I don't think it's a bad thing. I've just never really done it that much in a professional sense. And to be perfectly honest, I haven't really done it in a domestic sense either. Seasoning steaks, I like to use kosher salt. I've done a whole video on salt and how to use salt. There's a link up here for that here. It talks about salt and it talks about dry brining. Again, dry brining is worthwhile doing if you have the time. If you don't have the time and you haven't dry brined, don't stress too much. It's not the end of the world. So kosher salt, or cooking sea salt as we call it here in Australia, get it on your piece of meat and be generous. It's a big piece of meat. Most of that salt is gonna come off in the pan or on the grill anyway. Season from a height, then you get more of an even spread, and make sure you season all sides. The other thing you should do is before you season it is to pat them dry. If your steaks are a little bit wet, especially if they come out of cryovac, make sure you pat them dry so the surface is dry. Shouldn't be any moisture or as little moisture as you can on the top of the steak, because any moisture on there is going to be the enemy of crust, or making a good crust, and it's going to slow down that process. So what's the best method for cooking a steak? Now let me be honest about this. I've cooked professionally for but over 2 decades now. The best way I think to cook a steak is over charcoal. However, it's not always possible. The second best is either a pan like this or a char grill like we've got here. The only difference between these two is that this is going to have char lines on it. They're going to get the same Maillard reaction that's happening. The difference is just how it looks. So I've got 3 steaks here. I've got a sirloin, got a big piece of bavette, and I've got a lovely ribeye or a Scotch fillet on the bone. For me, there's only one oil you should use when you're cooking beef, and that is tallow, beef fat. So a couple of ways you can do that. You can either buy tallow now in most supermarkets and stuff, or when you're at the butcher, ask them to throw you in a piece of the trimming. I'm just going to take a piece off here for an example, like so. Put that in the pan, and that'll render out enough fat for you to cook that piece of meat. You got a bit of fat rendering out there. On the steak goes, lay it away from yourself so you don't splash yourself, and then put a weight on top of it. For the sirloin, we really want to render this fat cap here. So we're going to lay that down on the grill and let that cook out. The bavette, as you can see here, lots of big strands. We want to flash fry this pretty quickly, so we won't put that on the grill just yet. Now, temperature of your pan is also really important. You're going to see a lot of people saying you need to get your pan ripping hot, which is true. You do need to get your pan hot. However, you don't want it so hot that it catches fire, the fat catches fire. You also don't want to get the exterior of your steak too hot, because like I talked about at the start, that's where your grey band comes in. So what happens when you get a grey band is if the outside of your steak overcooks faster than the inside, you're trying to avoid the grey band, you're probably cooking it at a too hot a temperature. A lot of that fat's rendered out. I'm going to pull that piece of meat out and use it on the rest of this grill. And if I've used tallow and you're trying to use a grill like that, melt a little bit and brush the outside. The other question I get asked all the time is, how do I get a good crust? For me, you get a good crust by flipping your steak often. I think there's an old school method that you just flip your steak once. What happens with that is that you encourage the outside to overcook, you get a grey band, and you don't get a good crust. So how you get a good crust is by flipping your steak every 30 to 45 seconds and letting it cook through slowly like that. Another key thing to do is to move your steak. When you flip your steak, move it from the place that it was in the pan, because where it was is going to be cooler than right next to it. So even if you move it 2 or 3 centimeters, an inch away from where it was last time, that part of the pan or the heating element is going to have more heat than where the steak was. Now, another myth I want to bust is this finger myth. Now, if you're in the bush and you've got nothing else to go by, you don't have a thermometer, I guess this is better than nothing. However, it's quite unreliable. All steaks are different. How that bavette's going to feel versus how that sirloin versus how that ribeye is going to feel, the pressure, using Angus versus Wagyu, or if you're just using a normal, Brabant steak, they're all going to feel different. Best way to know how your steak is cooked is with one of these. And I always get comments when I talk about this. I cook steaks, I've never used a thermometer. Great, I'm really happy for you. But for most people, including the best steak restaurants in the world, they use one of these things because you can't argue with it. It's a measurement, a standard unit of measurement, and it's always right. So then you're probably asking, Andy, what temperature should I take my steak to? In my opinion, most of the charts that you see online are wrong. Why? Because I think they tell you what temperature you should take your steak to, including resting, whereas I like to run off the theory is this is the temperature you should take your steak from the pan and start to rest it. So here is my chart of what temperatures I think you should pull your steak at. We're going to cook all my steaks to medium rare today, so I'm going to pull them at 46 degrees Celsius. So where should you probe your steak? If you go dead center in the middle, it's really close to the edge. I like to go about 3 centimeters in from one side and about 2/3 of the way in or 1/3 of the way in. And right there, I'm at about 40 degrees right now. So I haven't got too much longer to go. If you go dead center, your center's gonna be, perfectly cooked, but the one closest to the edge is gonna be probably over. You can see just how much fat has rendered from that steak and come out into your pan. Do not throw that fat away. That is liquid gold. Save that for the next steak you're cooking. save it to roast some potatoes, lots of things. So what other ways could you cook a steak if you don't want to use a pan? The reverse sear method is really, really popular. And for good reason, it's very consistent and very easy to do. The only downside about truly reverse searing a piece of meat like this is it takes a long time. I think it's really worth doing if you're doing like a big rib roast. You should definitely reverse sear that because it's really hard to control that internal temperature if you don't reverse seal it. For a steak like this, I just do it in a pan. Ideally, I just do it over charcoal with lots of tallow. Okay, now that's up to temperature, I'm gonna pull this out and let it rest. So meanwhile, while those other steaks were resting, this bavette was coming up to temperature. And it's there now. I'm going to take it off and rest it. So in my opinion, resting steaks is not optional. You have to rest your steaks. As a general rule of thumb, you need to rest it at least half the amount of time that you cook the steak, if not longer. If you don't rest your steaks, a lot of juices are going to come out. And there's a misconception that the juice or the red liquid that comes out of steak is blood. It's not blood. It's myoglobin and a little bit of iron mixed in together. It's perfectly safe to eat. So rest your steaks for at least half the amount of time that you cook them before you carve them. If you're worried that your steak's cold when you eat it, put it back in a hot pan for a couple of seconds on each side before you carve it. Quick recap, buy the best quality steak you can for your price point. Don't always go for the main primals. Look outside those primals because some of the delicious cuts of meat are cheaper than the primals. Season your steak as early as you can. If you want to dry brine it overnight, great. If you don't have time or you've forgotten, don't stress it at all. But just season it and make sure you get a lot of seasoned salt on there. Most of it stays in the pan anyway. Don't get your pan too hot. Yes, absolutely, you want your pan hot because if you don't, you're just gonna boil your steak. But you don't want your pan so hot that the outside temperature of your meat spikes. And that spike in temperature is what's causing your gray band. Use a thermometer to make sure you cook your steaks correctly in the right internal temperature. And don't be fooled into thinking that 55 degrees is a medium rare steak. It's not. That's a medium well steak in my opinion. And last, one of my big non-negotiables, make sure you rest your steaks, please. It's gonna improve the quality of eating when it gets on your table. But enough of that. Let's see if I can actually back up all my statements and I've actually cooked these steaks correctly. Look at that. That was cooked to 46 degrees internal, no gray band, perfectly pink and rosy all the way through, and a great crust on the outside. My last tip is when you're carving, make sure you carve it against the grain. Smaller fibers mean better mouthfeel. One of my favorite things to do is to take some of that leftover fat from the pan and just pour it back over the meat. Just adds a layer of richness and luxury at no extra cost to you. So there you go. This is how I cook delicious steak at home. These are my fundamentals that have stood me well in the professional kitchen for well over 25 years. Now I fully understand that people have different ways of doing things and I'm fully supportive of that. If you've got a way that you like to cook a steak, then fantastic, keep going. But enough gas bagging, I want to eat some meat. You don't even need a knife. It's not until you taste 3 different cuts like that next to each other that you really understand the nuances that beef can have. From the super buttery and very tender ribeye to the really beefy and full of flavor bavette, then to the sirloin, which funnily enough was my least favorite out of all these 3 steaks. If I had to choose one, honestly, it's probably the bavette. It's got so much flavor, great texture, and a delicious cut of beef. Thanks for watching, legends. Like this video if you think anything from it. Subscribe if you're not. We'll see you next week for another recipe. Peace.